The revolver gleamed in the afternoon sun like a promise of something better. And Josephine Vale knew with every fiber of her being that learning to fire it would change everything about her miserable existence in Knights Ferry, California. She stood outside the weathered fence of the Harrison Ranch, her cotton dress dusty from the 3-mile walk from town, watching the tall cowboy practice his draw. He was fast, faster than anyone she had ever seen, and the tin cans he set up on fence posts never stood a chance. Each shot rang out with precision, the metal flying backward in perfect arcs. Josephine counted 6 shots before he paused to reload, his movements smooth and practiced. It was September of 1878, and Josephine had been in Knights Ferry for exactly 2 months, ever since her aunt had died and left her the tiny millinery shop on Main Street. At 22 years old, she found herself alone in a town where everyone seemed to know everyone else, where the men looked at her with either pity or something far worse, and where the sound of gunfire echoed through the streets at least once a week. The cowboy noticed her then, his gray eyes narrowing as he holstered his weapon. He was somewhere in his mid-20s, Josephine guessed, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell just past his collar. He wore a simple brown vest over a worn shirt, and his boots were scuffed from hard work. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice carried across the distance between them, neither friendly nor hostile. Josephine gripped the fence rail harder. She had rehearsed this moment a dozen times on the walkover, but now that she was here, the words seemed foolish. Still, she had not walked 3 miles in the heat to turn back now. "I need you to teach me how to shoot," she called back, lifting her chin. The cowboy walked closer, his spurs jingling with each step. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into the sun for years. "That's so. Why would a lady need to know how to shoot?" "Because I am tired of being afraid," Josephine said, the words coming out more forcefully than she intended. "Because 3 nights ago, someone broke into my shop. Because when I walk home after dark, men follow me. Because Sheriff Dawson told me there was nothing he could do unless something actually happened to me, and I refused to wait for that." The cowboy studied her face, and Josephine forced herself not to look away. She had learned in the past 2 months that showing weakness in Knights Ferry was an invitation for trouble. "What is your name?" he asked finally. "Josephine Vale. I own the hat shop on Main Street." "Hayes Anderson," he replied, extending his hand over the fence. His grip was firm but careful when she shook it. "Miss Vale, shooting a gun is not the same as feeling safe. A weapon can give you a false sense of security if you do not know what you are doing." "Then teach me what I am doing," Josephine insisted. "Please, I can pay you." Hayes looked at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "I do not want your money, but if I agree to this, you do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. Guns are not toys, and I will not have your injury on my conscience." Relief flooded through Josephine so suddenly that her knees felt weak. "Yes, of course, anything you say. Can you come tomorrow morning, early before it gets too hot?" "I can close the shop," Josephine said quickly. "Nobody buys hats in the morning anyway." Hayes nodded slowly. "All right then. Tomorrow at dawn, bring water and wear something you do not mind getting dirty. We will start with the basics." That night, Josephine barely slept. She lay in the small room behind her shop, listening to the sounds of Knights Ferry at night. Somewhere down the street, a piano played in the saloon. Horses whinnied in the livery stable. Men's voices rose and fell, sometimes in laughter, sometimes in anger. Every sound made her tense, made her think about the night someone had jimmied open her back door, and she had hidden in the tiny closet, trembling, clutching a broom handle like a weapon. She thought about Hayes Anderson too, about the careful way he had looked at her, as if he were seeing past the desperate woman at his fence to something more. Most men in town either dismissed her entirely or looked at her like she was available merchandise. Hayes had done neither, and that alone made her want to trust him. When the sky began to lighten, Josephine was already awake. She dressed in her oldest work dress, a faded blue cotton that had seen better days, and tied her dark hair back with a simple ribbon. She filled a canteen with water from the pump and started the walk to the Anderson ranch just as the sun crested the horizon. The morning air was cool and fresh, a relief from the oppressive heat that would come later. Josephine walked quickly, her worn boots kicking up small clouds of dust on the dirt road. She passed the Stanislaus River on her left, its water moving slow and peaceful in the early light. Knights Ferry was beautiful in its own way, she thought. If only she could feel safe here, maybe she could appreciate it more. Hayes was waiting for her at the same fence where she had first approached him. He had 2 revolvers laid out on a weathered wooden table, along with boxes of ammunition and several tin cans. "You are punctual," he said as she approached. "That is good. Shows you are serious." "I am serious," Josephine confirmed. Hayes gestured for her to come around to the gate. She let herself into the fenced area, suddenly aware that she was alone with a man she barely knew far from town. But the morning light felt safe somehow, and Hayes's demeanor was all business. "First lesson," Hayes said, picking up one of the revolvers. "This is a Colt single-action Army revolver. It was designed in 1873, so it is relatively new. It fires a .45 caliber bullet and holds 6 rounds. Before you ever fire one, you need to understand how it works, how to load it safely, and how to handle it with respect." For the next hour, Hayes took Josephine through the mechanics of the weapon. He showed her how to open the loading gate, how to carefully insert the cartridges, how to check if it was loaded. His hands were patient, demonstrating each step multiple times, making her repeat the actions until they became less awkward. "Never point a gun at anything you do not intend to shoot," Hayes said, his voice taking on a serious edge. "Not at yourself, not at me, not at anything living unless your life depends on it. The moment you pick up a weapon, you are responsible for where it points and what happens if it fires." Josephine nodded, trying to absorb everything. The revolver was heavier than she expected, and the weight of it in her hand felt both empowering and terrifying. "Now," Hayes said, "before we fire a single shot, I want to talk about why you really want to learn this." Josephine looked up from the unloaded revolver in her hands. "I told you why. You told me you are afraid," Hayes corrected. "But I need to know what you plan to do with this skill once you have it. Because Miss Vale, carrying a gun and knowing how to use it changes things. It changes how you see the world, how you react to threats. It is not a decision to make lightly." Josephine set the revolver carefully on the table, remembering how he had shown her. "My Aunt Clara was the kindest woman I ever knew. When my parents died of fever 5 years ago, she took me in without question. She taught me her trade, gave me a home, treated me like a daughter. When she died this summer, she left me everything she had. That shop is all I have left of her, and this town is my home now, whether I wanted it to be or not." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I do not want to hurt anyone, Mr. Anderson. I do not want to become some gunslinger or make trouble. I just want to walk home at night without my heart pounding. I want to sleep without jerking awake at every sound. I want to stop feeling like a victim waiting for something terrible to happen." Hayes was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "That is honest. I appreciate that. But here is what I think, Miss Vale. A gun might give you some peace of mind, and there is value in that. But what you really need is not just shooting lessons. You need to learn how to stand your ground, how to trust your instincts, how to project confidence. Because the truth is, most men who prey on women are looking for easy targets. They want someone who will not fight back, who will not make noise, who will not be trouble. If you change the way you carry yourself, you might not need the gun at all. I still want to learn, Josephine said firmly. And I will still teach you, Hayes replied. But we are going to do this my way. We will work on shooting, yes, but we will also work on everything else. Deal, Josephine extended her hand. Deal. Hayes's calloused hand engulfed hers, and for the first time in months, Josephine felt something other than fear or grief. She felt hope. The shooting lesson that followed was humbling. Hayes started her with an unloaded gun, making her practice her stance and grip over and over. He positioned her body, adjusting her shoulders, showing her how to breathe, explaining the mechanics of aiming. You do not squeeze the trigger, he explained. You press it smoothly, gradually increasing pressure until the gun fires. If you jerk it, you will throw off your aim every time. When he finally let her load the revolver with a single bullet, Josephine's hands were shaking. Breathe, Hayes said calmly, standing just behind her shoulder. You are in control. The gun does what you tell it to do. Line up your sight with that tin on the left. Take your time. Josephine focused on the tin sitting on a fence post about 20 feet away. She tried to remember everything Hayes had taught her. Steady stance, firm grip, smooth trigger press. She squeezed slowly, and the gun fired with a tremendous boom that made her jump. The bullet kicked up dirt 3 feet to the right of the can. That was terrible, she said, discouraged. That was fine, Hayes countered. You kept your eyes open, you did not drop the gun, and you were safe the entire time. Everything else is just practice. They worked for another hour, until Josephine's arms ached and her ears were ringing despite the cotton wadding Hayes had given her to stuff in them. She managed to hit the can twice out of 20 shots, and each time she did, Hayes offered quiet praise that made her want to try harder. As the sun climbed higher and the heat became oppressive, Hayes called an end to the lesson. That is enough for today. You did well for your first time. I barely hit anything, Josephine protested, wiping sweat from her forehead. Shooting is like anything else. It takes time. Hayes began cleaning the revolvers with practiced efficiency. Can you come back tomorrow? Yes, Josephine said without hesitation. Good, and Miss Vale, on your walk back to town, I want you to practice something for me. What? Look people in the eye when you pass them. Stand up straight. Walk like you own the road. See how it feels. Josephine considered this. All right, I will try. The walk back to town in the growing heat should have been miserable, but Josephine felt energized despite her exhaustion. When she encountered old Mr. Fletcher driving his wagon toward the mill, she did as Hayes suggested. She stood straight, looked him in the eye, and nodded a greeting. Mr. Fletcher looked surprised but tipped his hat respectfully. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. Over the next 3 weeks, Josephine made the trip to the Anderson ranch every morning. Hayes was always waiting for her, and their lessons took on a comfortable rhythm. They would start with shooting practice, Hayes correcting her form, encouraging her progress. Then they would talk while cleaning the guns, and Josephine found herself sharing more about her life than she had intended. She learned about Hayes, too, in small pieces. He had come to California from Texas 5 years ago, looking for a fresh start after the war had taken his father and left his family's ranch in ruins. He worked his uncle's land now, raising cattle and breaking horses. He was 26 years old, had never been married, and preferred the company of animals to most people. Animals are honest, he said one morning as they watched his horses graze in the pasture. They do not lie or cheat or pretend to be something they are not. You always know where you stand with a horse." "That sounds lonely," Josephine observed. Hayes shrugged. "Maybe, but it is peaceful too." Josephine's shooting improved steadily. She could now hit the tin cans more often than she missed them, and Hayes had started moving them farther away. But more than the shooting, she found value in the conversations, in the way Hayes seemed to genuinely listen when she spoke, in how safe she felt in his presence. One morning in early October, as autumn began to cool the California heat, Hayes had a different kind of lesson planned. "No shooting today," he announced when she arrived. "Today we work on something more important." "More important than shooting?" Josephine asked, confused. "Much more important. Today I teach you how to not need to shoot." Hayes spent the morning teaching her about awareness, about reading situations before they became dangerous. He showed her vulnerable points on the human body, places where even a small woman could inflict enough pain to get away. He taught her to trust the feeling when something was wrong, to never dismiss her instincts. "Your gut knows things your head will not admit," Hayes said. "If someone makes you uncomfortable, there is usually a reason. You do not have to be polite to someone who might hurt you." They practiced scenarios, Hayes playing the role of various threats while Josephine learned to respond. It felt silly at first, but Hayes was serious and patient, and gradually Josephine understood what he was teaching her. It was not just about fighting back. It was about preventing the fight in the first place. "Most predators want an easy target," Hayes explained. "If you look like too much trouble, they will move on to someone else. That might sound harsh, but it is the truth of things." During a water break, sitting in the shade of Hayes's barn, Josephine asked the question that had been forming in her mind for weeks. "Why are you doing this? Really? You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. So why spend all this time teaching me?" Hayes was quiet for a long moment, staring out at his land. When he spoke, his voice was softer than usual. "I had a sister once, Margaret. She was 2 years younger than me. After the war, when things were hard, she took a job in San Antonio to help support the family. One night she was walking home from work and—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "She never made it home. They found her 3 days later." Josephine felt her throat constrict. "Hayes, I am so sorry. The men who did it were never caught. My mother died 6 months later from grief, and that is when I decided to leave Texas. Too many memories, too much anger." Hayes looked at her then, his gray eyes intense. "When you showed up at my fence, desperate to learn how to protect yourself, I saw Margaret. I saw my mother. I saw every woman who has ever been afraid to walk alone at night. And I thought, maybe I cannot change what happened to my sister, but I can help you. That has to count for something." Without thinking, Josephine reached out and placed her hand over his. "It counts for everything." Hayes looked down at their hands, and something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them had intended but could not deny. The air felt charged, heavy with unspoken feelings. Hayes cleared his throat and stood up, breaking the contact. "We should get back to work." But things were different after that. The lessons continued, but there was a new awareness between them. Josephine caught Hayes watching her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, his expression unguarded and warm. She found herself thinking about him at night, about the strength in his hands and the gentleness in his voice, about how safe she felt with him. One morning in late October, Josephine arrived at the ranch to find Hayes in a state of controlled anger. His movements were sharp, his jaw set, and he barely greeted her. "What is wrong?" she asked immediately. "Nothing," Hayes said shortly, then sighed. "Everything. I am sorry, Miss Vale. I am not fit company today. Tell me what happened." Hayes drove a hand through his hair. "I went into town this morning to pick up supplies. I overheard some men at the general store talking about you, the things they were saying." His hands clenched into fists. "I nearly started a fight right there." Josephine felt heat creep up her neck. She could imagine the kind of things men said about a young woman living alone. "What stopped you? The thought of you arriving here to find me nursing bruised knuckles and a black eye. You need these lessons more than I need the satisfaction of teaching those fools some manners." Hayes met her eyes. "But Josephine, if anyone ever actually bothers you, you tell me. Promise me that." It was the first time he had used her Christian name, and the sound of it in his low voice did strange things to her heartbeat. "I promise," she said softly. Hayes nodded, then seemed to shake off his dark mood. "All right then. Let us see if you can hit the cans from 30 paces today." That evening, as Josephine walked back to town, she thought about the protectiveness in Hayes's voice, the anger on her behalf. She thought about how her feelings for him had grown from gratitude to something much deeper, something that made her pulse race when he stood close to her to adjust her aim, something that made her count the hours until she could see him again. She was falling in love with Hayes Anderson, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning, Josephine made a decision. She arrived at the ranch wearing her best dress, a deep green cotton that her aunt had made for her, with her hair arranged more carefully than usual. Hayes noticed immediately, his eyes widening slightly when he saw her. "You look nice," he said, then seemed embarrassed by his own words. "I mean, you always look nice, but today you look especially." "Thank you," Josephine said, saving him from his fumbling. "I wanted to ask you something, and I thought I should look presentable for it." Hayes looked nervous. "What is it?" "There is a harvest social on Saturday evening at the community hall. Would you escort me?" Hayes stared at her for a long moment. "Josephine, I do not know if that is a good idea." The rejection stung, but Josephine kept her voice steady. "Why not? Because you are my student, because people will talk. Because I am just a ranch hand with a dark past, and you deserve better than Hayes Anderson. That is the biggest load of nonsense I have ever heard," Josephine interrupted, surprising both of them with her vehemence. "You have been teaching me for weeks that I should not let fear control my life, that I should trust my instincts and go after what I want. Well, I want to go to that social with you. I want everyone in Knights Ferry to see that I am not alone, that I have someone who cares about me. And more than that, I want to dance with you because I think about you constantly and I am tired of pretending I do not." The words hung in the air between them. Hayes looked stunned, his mouth slightly open. "You think about me?" he finally asked, his voice rough. "All the time," Josephine admitted, her cheeks burning but her gaze steady. Hayes closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He stopped just before reaching her, his hands hovering uncertainly. "Josephine, I need you to know something. I did not teach you these things to earn your affection. I did it because it was the right thing to do. I do not want you to feel obligated to me in any way." "I know that," Josephine said. "That is part of why I care for you. You never asked for anything in return. You just kept giving, kept teaching, kept making me stronger. How could I not develop feelings for you?" Hayes reached out slowly and cupped her cheek with his rough hand. "I have wanted to touch you like this for weeks. Every time I stood close to you during lessons, every time I adjusted your stance or your grip, all I could think about was how much I wanted to hold you properly." "Then why did you not?" Josephine whispered, leaning into his touch. "Because I needed to be your teacher first. You needed to learn to trust yourself before you could truly trust me." Hayes's thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "But Josephine, if you are sure about this, if you truly want me to court you, then yes. I will take you to that social. I will take you anywhere you want to go." "I am sure," Josephine said. Hayes smiled then, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face into something beautiful. Then he leaned down and kissed her, gentle and questioning at first. then deeper when Josephine wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with all the pent-up longing of the past weeks. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Hayes rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably do some actual teaching today," he murmured, though he made no move to let her go. "Probably," Josephine agreed, equally reluctant to step away. They did eventually get around to shooting practice, though both of them were distracted. Josephine hit more cans than she missed, and Hayes's praise felt different now, warmer and more personal. When he stood behind her to correct her stance, she leaned back into him, and his arms tightened around her just for a moment before professional distance was restored. As the days until Saturday passed, Josephine felt like she was floating. The fear that had dominated her life for months had receded, replaced by anticipation and joy. She continued her daily lessons with Hayes, but now they were punctuated with stolen kisses and long conversations that stretched well past the end of the formal teaching. Hayes told her more about his life in Texas, about growing up during the war, about the pain of losing everything and starting over. Josephine shared her own stories about her childhood, her parents, the aunt who had saved her. They talked about their hopes for the future, about the possibility of building something together. "I want to expand the ranch eventually," Hayes said one afternoon as they sat on his porch watching the sun begin its descent. "Maybe raise some cattle, breed better horses. Make something my father would have been proud of." "That sounds wonderful," Josephine said, her head resting on his shoulder. "What about you? What do you want?" Hayes asked, playing with her fingers. "I want to feel safe," Josephine said honestly. "I want a home that feels like mine. I want a family again, people who belong to me and I to them." She looked up at him. "I want you." Hayes kissed her thoroughly. "You have me, Josephine, for as long as you want me." Saturday arrived with perfect autumn weather, cool and clear. Josephine spent the afternoon preparing, pressing her best dress, arranging her hair in a style she had not attempted since leaving St. Louis years ago. When Hayes arrived at her shop to collect her, dressed in clean dark trousers and a white shirt that made his gray eyes even more striking, Josephine felt her breath catch. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. The walk to the community hall was different from any walk Josephine had taken in Knights Ferry before. She was not alone. She was not afraid. She was with a man she loved, and for the first time since arriving in this town, she felt like she belonged. The hall was already full of people when they arrived. Farmers and ranchers and townspeople gathered for the monthly social. Music played from the small stage where 3 men had assembled with a fiddle, a guitar, and a harmonica. Tables lined the walls, laden with food that the women of the community had prepared. The smell of cider and fresh bread filled the air. Josephine felt the eyes on them immediately, the curious stares and whispered conversations. Hayes must have felt it too because his arm tightened around hers. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Let them talk." But not everyone was hostile. Mrs. Chen from the laundry greeted Josephine warmly, complimenting her dress. The blacksmith, Tom Rivers, shook Hayes's hand and asked about his horses. Gradually, as the evening progressed, the initial shock of their arrival together seemed to fade into acceptance. Hayes proved to be a surprisingly good dancer. He led her through a Virginia reel with confidence, then guided her through a waltz that left her breathless and laughing. Between dances, they sampled the food and talked with other attendees, and Josephine found herself relaxing, enjoying the normalcy of a social gathering. Then she saw them. 3 men standing near the refreshment table, all watching her with expressions that ranged from amusement to something uglier. One of them was Jake Morrison, who worked at the mill. He had followed her home twice, making comments that had frightened her so badly she had started carrying a knife in her pocket. Hayes followed her gaze and stiffened. "That one of them?" "Yes," Josephine whispered. "The tall one in the brown vest." "Stay here," Hayes said, starting to move toward them. Josephine grabbed his arm. "No, this is my fight, remember? You taught me how to handle this." Hayes looked torn, but he nodded slowly. "I will be right here if you need me." Josephine took a deep breath, channeling everything Hayes had taught her over the past weeks. She walked directly toward Jake Morrison, her posture straight, her gaze level. The conversations around the refreshment table died as she approached. "Mr. Morrison," Josephine said clearly, her voice carrying despite her racing heart. "I wanted to tell you something in front of witnesses." Jake looked startled, glancing at his friends. "What is that, Miss Vale?" "If you ever follow me again, if you ever make another inappropriate comment to me, if you ever so much as look at me the wrong way, I will make you regret it. I am not defenseless. I am not alone. And I am done being afraid of men like you." The hall had gone quiet now, people turning to watch the confrontation. Jake's face reddened, his hands clenching. "That sounds like a threat," he said, trying to sound confident but failing. "It is a promise," Josephine replied calmly. "I have learned to shoot, Mr. Morrison. I have learned to defend myself. More importantly, I have learned that men like you are cowards who only target women you think will not fight back. Well, I will fight back. So will the man I am courting, who happens to be the fastest draw in 3 counties. Do we understand each other?" Jake looked past her to where Hayes stood watching, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. The color drained from Jake's face. "We understand each other," Jake muttered, then turned and left the hall, his friends trailing behind him. The silence broke as conversations resumed, many people nodding at Josephine with new respect. Mrs. Chen actually applauded, and several other women smiled at her approvingly. Hayes reached her in 3 strides, pulling her into a quick embrace. "That was incredible," he said into her hair. "I am so proud of you." Josephine was shaking, adrenaline flooding her system, but she also felt amazing, powerful, free. "I could not have done it without you. Everything you taught me about standing up, about not showing fear, it worked." "No," Hayes said, pulling back to look at her. "That was all you. I just helped you find what was already there." They left the social an hour later, walking slowly back toward Josephine's shop. The night was cool and filled with stars, and Josephine felt like she was seeing Knights Ferry for the first time, really seeing it, not through a lens of fear but with hope at her door. Hayes pulled her close, kissing her with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Can I see you tomorrow?" he asked against her lips. "I was thinking I might skip our lesson tomorrow," Josephine said, and Hayes pulled back, looking confused and hurt. She smiled. "Because I would rather spend the day with you doing something other than shooting. Maybe you could show me more of your ranch. We could go riding, have a picnic." Relief flooded Hayes's face. "I would love that. I will bring my best horses and enough food for both of us." That next day marked a shift in their relationship. The lessons continued, but now they were just one part of a broader courtship. Hayes brought her wildflowers from his land. Josephine baked him apple pies using her aunt's recipe. They went riding together through the foothills, Hayes teaching her to ride with the same patience he had shown teaching her to shoot. They attended church together on Sundays, had dinner at the small restaurant in town, walked along the Stanislaus River in the evenings. The town's attitude toward Josephine seemed to change as well. The men who had made her uncomfortable before gave her wide berth now. Women who had ignored her began greeting her, inviting her to quilting circles and prayer groups. The millinery shop did better business too, as if her newfound confidence made her more approachable. In November, Hayes asked Josephine to have Thanksgiving dinner at his ranch. She arrived to find he had spent days preparing, cleaning his cabin until it gleamed, cooking an ambitious meal that included a turkey and all the traditional sides. "I might have gotten a little carried away," Hayes admitted, showing her the laden table. "It is perfect," Josephine said, kissing him. "This is the first real Thanksgiving I have had since my parents died. Thank you for giving me this." They ate and talked and laughed, and afterward, sitting on Hayes's porch with cups of coffee, watching the sun set over the California hills, Hayes took Josephine's hand. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I have loved you since the day you showed up at my fence, desperate and determined and absolutely refusing to give up. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Josephine Vale, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Josephine's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Hayes pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my grandmother's. My father gave it to my mother and she gave it to me before she died. I have been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment." The ring fit perfectly, and Josephine stared at it through her tears, hardly able to believe this was real. "I love you too, Hayes, so much." They were married in January of 1879 in the small church in Knights Ferry. Mrs. Chen and the blacksmith Tom Rivers stood as witnesses, and half the town turned out for the ceremony. Josephine wore a simple white dress she had sewn herself, with lace from her aunt's shop trimming the sleeves. Hayes wore his best suit, looking nervous and handsome and so full of love that Josephine felt overwhelmed by it. Afterward, there was a gathering at the Anderson Ranch, which was now also Josephine's ranch. She had sold the millinery shop to a young woman from Sacramento, using the money to help Hayes expand their land and build a proper house. The cabin would become a guest house, Hayes said, once they had children and needed more space. Their first year of marriage was hard work, but filled with joy. They built the new house together, Hayes doing the heavy construction while Josephine handled the finishing touches, painting and decorating and making it a home. They added to the cattle herd, broke and trained horses, planted a vegetable garden that thrived in the California sun. Josephine continued practicing her shooting, though now it was just a skill she maintained rather than a desperate need. She had become quite good at it, actually, good enough that Hayes started bringing her along when he needed to hunt. They made a good team in everything, complementing each other's strengths, supporting each other's weaknesses. In the summer of 1879, Josephine discovered she was pregnant. Hayes's reaction when she told him was everything she could have hoped for, pure joy and excitement mixed with an almost comical concern for her well-being. He became impossibly protective, insisting she not lift anything heavy, not ride the horses, not do any of the 100 tasks she did every day. "Hayes, I am pregnant, not made of glass," Josephine finally said in exasperation. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I will be fine." "I know," Hayes said, looking sheepish. "I just cannot help worrying. You are the most important thing in my life, Josephine. You and this baby." Their son was born in March of 1880, during a late winter storm that kept the doctor from arriving in time. Mrs. Chen ended up delivering the baby with Hayes's assistance, and when Josephine finally held her screaming, red-faced son, she thought her heart might burst from happiness. They named him Henry, after Hayes's father, and he had his father's gray eyes and his mother's dark hair. Hayes was a natural father, patient and loving, getting up for midnight feedings even though Josephine insisted she could handle it. She would often wake to find him sitting in the rocking chair by the window, holding Henry and talking to him in a low voice about horses and ranching, and how much his mother was loved. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered. allowing them to hire 2 ranch hands to help with the work. Josephine started a small business making leather goods, using skills she had learned from the saddle maker in town, beautiful saddles and bridles that became sought after throughout the region. She worked while Henry napped or played nearby, and Hayes would come in from the fields to find her surrounded by tools and leather, their son babbling happily in his cradle. One evening in the spring of 1882, with Henry toddling around the house and Josephine pregnant with their second child, they sat on the porch of their house watching the sunset. It had become their favorite time of day, a moment to pause and appreciate everything they had built together. "Do you remember the first day we met?" Hayes asked, pulling Josephine closer against his side. "How could I forget? I was so desperate, so afraid. I thought learning to shoot would solve all my problems. And now?" Josephine considered the question, looking out at their land, their home, their son playing in the grass with the ranch dog they had adopted. "Now I know you were right. It was never really about the shooting. It was about learning to trust myself, learning that I was stronger than I thought." "You gave me that, Hayes. You gave me everything." Hayes kissed the top of her head. "You gave me everything, too. A reason to believe in something again, a family, a home. I was just going through the motions before you arrived, Josephine. You reminded me that life could be good again." Their second child, a daughter they named Clara after Josephine's aunt, was born in September. She was easier than Henry had been, a calm baby who rarely cried, with Hayes's serious expression and Josephine's smile. Henry was fascinated by his little sister, constantly wanting to help with her care, bringing her toys and singing her songs he made up. The years passed quickly after that, filled with the busy chaos of raising children and running a ranch. Henry grew into a responsible boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about horses and cattle. Clara was quieter, preferring to stay near her mother, learning to sew and cook and manage a household. In 1885, their third child was born, another son they named Thomas after the blacksmith who had become a good friend. Tom Rivers had passed away the previous year, and naming their son after him felt like the right way to honor his memory and the kindness he had shown them. Josephine sometimes thought about those first terrifying months in Knights Ferry, when she had been so alone and afraid. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. The woman she had been then, timid and desperate, had transformed into someone confident and capable, someone who could handle whatever life threw at her. But she also knew that transformation had not happened because she had learned to shoot a gun, though that skill had given her some peace of mind. It had happened because Hayes had taught her something far more valuable: how to trust herself, how to stand tall, how to see her own strength. One evening in the summer of 1890, with their children all grown into independent people who ran the ranch with their parents, Josephine found Hayes in the barn checking on a mare about to foal. He was 58 now, with silver threading through his dark hair, lines deeper around his eyes. But to Josephine, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him practicing his draw. "I was thinking about something," Josephine said, leaning against the stall door. "What is that?" Hayes asked, not looking up from examining the mare. "Remember when I first came to you and begged you to teach me to shoot?" Hayes smiled. "How could I forget? You looked like you were ready to march into battle, all determination and terror. You could have just taught me to shoot and sent me on my way. It would have been easier, taken less time. But you did not. Why?" Hayes finally looked at her, his gray eyes warm. "Because I knew even then that you did not need shooting lessons. You needed to learn that you were not alone, that someone saw you, really saw you, and thought you were worth the time and effort. You needed to trust yourself before you could trust anyone else. And I needed you too, though I did not realize it at first. I needed someone to remind me why life was worth living, why opening your heart despite the risk of loss was brave, not foolish. Josephine crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "You saved me, Hayes Anderson." "No," Hayes said, returning her embrace. "We saved each other." Standing there in the barn, with the sounds of their ranch around them and the life they had built together stretching out in all directions, Josephine thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From fear to courage, from loneliness to love, from desperation to peace. She had come to California alone and afraid, begging a stranger to teach her violence as a solution to her problems. Instead, he had taught her trust, courage, and love. He had shown her that real strength came not from the ability to hurt, but from the courage to be vulnerable, to open yourself to another person completely. And in doing so, Hayes had given her everything she had ever wanted: a home, a family, a partner who understood her completely and, most importantly, herself. The mare nickered softly, and Hayes moved to check on her again. Josephine watched him work, these hands that had taught her to shoot, to ride, to trust, now gentle with the laboring animal. These same hands had held their children, built their home, touched her with such love and tenderness for over a decade. "I love you," Josephine said softly. Hayes looked up and smiled. "I love you too. Always have, always will." As the sun set outside and the mare finally delivered a healthy foal with Hayes's patient assistance, Josephine reflected on how different her life had turned out from anything she could have imagined that day she first approached Hayes's fence. She had asked for shooting lessons and received a lifetime of love instead. Their oldest son, Henry, was now running most of the ranch operations, having grown into a fine young man of 20. He had his father's calm demeanor and his mother's determination, and he had recently started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Clara, at 18, had developed her mother's business sense and was expanding the leather goods operation into saddles and tack that were sold as far away as San Francisco. Young Thomas, at 15, was still figuring out his path, but showed promise with horses. The ranch had grown considerably over the years. What had started as Hayes's modest operation had expanded to over 500 acres, with healthy cattle herds and a thriving horse breeding program. The original cabin still stood, now used as an office and meeting space. The house they had built together had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family. Knights Ferry had changed too over the years. The town had grown, attracting new families and businesses. The lawless edge that had frightened Josephine so much when she first arrived had softened as civilization established firmer roots. The railroad had come through in 1888, bringing greater prosperity and connection to the wider world. But through all these changes, the core of what mattered to Josephine had remained constant. Hayes, their children, their home, the life they had built through hard work and unwavering commitment to each other. That night, after the new foal was settled with its mother and they had returned to the house, Hayes and Josephine sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The California stars spread above them in brilliant profusion, and the sounds of the ranch settling for the night created a peaceful symphony. "You ever regret it?" Hayes asked suddenly. "Staying here, I mean. You could have gone anywhere after your aunt died." "Back east, to San Francisco, anywhere at all. Instead, you stayed in Knights Ferry and married a cowboy." Josephine laughed. "Not just any cowboy, the best cowboy, the man who saw past my fear to the person I could become, the man who taught me that asking for help was not weakness but wisdom. The man who loved me even when I did not love myself." She took his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. I have never regretted a single day, Hayes. Not one. This life we have built together is more than I ever dreamed possible." Hayes raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You made me whole again, Josephine. After losing everything in Texas, after my sister and my mother, I thought I was done feeling anything but grief and anger. Then you walked into my life, determined and brave and absolutely refusing to give up, and everything changed. You gave me a reason to hope again." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the moon rise over the hills. From inside the house came the sounds of their children preparing for bed, Clara singing softly to herself as she often did, the boys arguing good-naturedly about something. "They turned out well," Hayes observed. "Our children." "They did," Josephine agreed with pride. "Because they had a good example. You have been an amazing father, Hayes, patient, loving, present. You taught Henry how to be a good man. You taught Clara that women can be strong and capable of anything. You taught Thomas kindness." "We taught them," Hayes corrected. "Everything they are is because of both of us, working together." It was true, Josephine reflected. Their partnership had been equal from the start, each bringing different strengths that complemented the other. Hayes's steadiness balanced her occasional impulsiveness. Her optimism lifted him when the weight of old memories pressed too hard. Together they were stronger than either could have been alone. As autumn turned to winter in 1890, Josephine noticed Hayes moving a bit slower, taking longer to complete tasks that used to be easy. He insisted he was fine, just getting older, but she worried. Finally, in December, she convinced him to see the doctor in town. The doctor's diagnosis was not terrible but not great either. Hayes's heart was showing signs of strain, likely from years of hard physical labor. He needed to slow down, delegate more, take better care of himself. At 58, the doctor said, Hayes had to accept he was not a young man anymore. Hayes was frustrated by the limitations, but Josephine was firm. "We have raised 3 strong children who are perfectly capable of running this ranch. You have spent decades working yourself to exhaustion. It is time to let them take over more responsibility while we enjoy the life we have built." Reluctantly, Hayes agreed. Henry stepped fully into the role of ranch manager, with Clara handling the business side and Thomas taking charge of the horse breeding program. Hayes remained involved but in an advisory capacity, teaching and guiding rather than doing all the work himself. To Josephine's surprise and delight, Hayes seemed to flourish in this new role. With less physical strain and more time to rest, his health stabilized. They spent more time together, taking long walks, visiting neighbors, working side by side in the vegetable garden Josephine had expanded over the years. In the spring of 1891, they traveled together for the first time since their honeymoon, taking the train to San Francisco for a week. They stayed in a proper hotel, ate in restaurants, visited museums and parks. It was a different world from their ranch, exciting and overwhelming, and they were both happy to return home afterward. "I like our life," Hayes said on the train ride back to Knights Ferry. "I like waking up to the sound of our horses, to the smell of coffee brewing in our kitchen, to you beside me every morning. I do not need anything else." "Neither do I," Josephine agreed, resting her head on his shoulder. "This is enough. More than enough. This is everything." The years continued to pass, each one bringing new challenges and joys. Henry married his sweetheart in 1892, and by 1894, Josephine and Hayes were grandparents to 2 beautiful granddaughters. Clara married in 1895, choosing a lawyer from Sacramento who treated her with respect and supported her business ambitions. Thomas showed no signs of settling down, perfectly content working with the horses and living in the old cabin. Josephine was 60 years old in 1896, and Hayes was 64. Their hair was silver now, their movements slower, but the love between them had only deepened with time. They knew each other completely, could communicate with a glance, moved through their days with the synchronicity of long partnership. One evening that summer, sitting on their porch in the twilight, Hayes turned to Josephine with serious eyes. "If something happens to me," he began, and Josephine immediately tried to interrupt, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me say this. If something happens to me, I need you to know that you will be fine. You are the strongest person I have ever known, Josephine. You do not need me to be strong, though I hope you have enjoyed having me by your side." "Hayes Anderson, do not talk like that," Josephine said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are not going anywhere." "We are all going somewhere eventually," Hayes said gently. "But whenever that time comes, whether tomorrow or 20 years from now, I want you to remember something. That first day when you asked me to teach you to shoot, I could have just shown you how to fire a gun and sent you away. But I saw something in you, Josephine. I saw courage and determination and a refusal to surrender to fear. All I did was help you see it too. Everything you have become, everything you have accomplished, that was always in you. I just helped you find it." Tears streamed down Josephine's face. "You did more than that. You gave me a life, a home, a family. You gave me love and partnership and support. You gave me yourself, completely and without reservation." Hayes pulled her close. "And you gave me the same. We saved each other, remember? Two broken people who found each other at exactly the right time." They held each other as the stars emerged. Two people who had traveled a long road together and would continue traveling it for as long as fate allowed. Hayes lived for many more years after that conversation, defying the dire predictions about his heart. He lived to see all 3 of his children happily settled, to hold 6 grandchildren, to celebrate his and Josephine's 30th wedding anniversary in 1909. He lived to see automobiles arrive in Knights Ferry, to see the town transform from a rough frontier settlement into a proper community. He lived to see the turn of the century, entering the new age with wonder and curiosity. But most importantly, he lived every day with Josephine by his side, his partner in all things, his best friend, his great love. And when he finally passed in his sleep in the winter of 1912, at the age of 80, he died knowing he had lived a good life, a full life, a life rich with meaning and love. Josephine grieved deeply, as anyone would grieve the loss of their life partner, but she did not fall apart. She remained strong, drawing on the lessons Hayes had taught her so many years ago about trust and courage and resilience. She continued managing the ranch with her children, continued making her leather goods, continued living fully even in her loss. Because Hayes had been right, that evening when he told her she would be fine without him. She was strong enough to survive anything, to weather any storm. He had helped her discover that strength, had nurtured it and believed in it, and now it sustained her. Josephine lived another 15 years after Hayes's death, long enough to see her grandchildren grown and starting families of their own. She lived to be 91 years old, sharp and capable almost to the end. When she finally passed in 1927, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Hayes had created, her last words were, "I am coming, my love. Wait for me." She was buried next to Hayes on a hillside overlooking their ranch, the land they had built together, the legacy they were leaving behind. On her gravestone, beneath her name and dates, were the words, "She asked him to teach her to shoot. He taught her to trust instead." Together they built a life of love. And in the end, that was the real story. Not about guns or violence or danger, but about 2 people who found each other when they both needed it most. About trust built slowly through patient teaching and careful listening. about courage found not in the ability to hurt, but in the willingness to be vulnerable, about love that started with desperate hope and grew into something strong and lasting and true. Hayes had taught Josephine that real strength came from within, that safety came not from weapons but from self-knowledge and confidence. That trust was the foundation of everything good in life. And Josephine had taught Hayes that it was possible to love again after loss, that opening your heart, despite past pain, was the only way to truly live, that building a future together was worth any risk. Their descendants still worked the Anderson Ranch over a century later, still told stories about the determined young woman who had begged the cowboy to teach her to shoot, and the wise man who taught her something far more valuable instead. Their love story became legend in Knights Ferry, a reminder that sometimes the things we think we need are not what we need at all, and sometimes the person who helps us find our way becomes the destination itself. In the end, Josephine had come to Hayes asking for lessons in violence, seeking safety through the ability to hurt others. Instead, Hayes gave her lessons in trust, showing her that real safety came from confidence, community, and the courage to be vulnerable with the right person. He gave her not just skills but wisdom, not just protection but partnership, not just lessons but love, and that made all the difference.